The following episode of the Movie Club podcast can and will contain spoilers. Please be aware of this before you listen. Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to the Movie Club podcast, the bi-monthly, irregular podcast where we get together with a bunch of people, choose two movies, and just dissect them and analyze them and just shoot the shit, basically. This is episode number 20, and coming up on this episode we're going to be talking about Takashi Miike's Visitor Q, and we're also going to be talking about Gaspar Noé's Irreversible. So thanks for joining us, thanks for downloading, and it's good to have you with us. I guess we'll go around the virtual round table and introduce ourselves. I am Sean from filmjunk.com.
I am Kurt from Row 3 and Twitch.
I am Jay from filmjunk.com and thedocumentaryblog.com.
I am Marina from row3.com and quietearth.us.
I'm James from wherethelongtailends.com.
And so we have a few of our regulars who aren't here. I think notably absent because of the actual movies we're talking about this time. So it's definitely some pretty extreme material in a lot of ways. But, you know, that does make for a good conversation, I think. So I guess we're going to start with Visitor Q. And strangely enough, the man who was pushing this one is not with us.
You see how he did that?
Kind of reminds me of the time the guy at our work, Jay, recommended everyone should watch Cannibal Holocaust, and then he didn't actually come to watch it himself. But so, Omar, thanks a lot for this. We appreciate it. But does anybody want to intro this? I know, Kurt, you kind of had a little bit of a background on where this movie came from, so maybe you can set it up.
Okay. Basically, I think there was a project in Japan with the emerging of video technology, and I think it was 5 or 6 directors got together, reasonably established, but still kind of up-and-coming directors, and the goal was to make a movie using new technology and cameras that could get anywhere, and to basically make a cheap, fast and quick movie. And Takashi Miike, who, I mean, he had probably, it's Miike, he probably had like 50 films under his belt in 5 years or whatever. But, I mean, he had already had a huge amount of international success with Audition, like actual sort of higher brow critical success. And then he had loads of sort of midnight movie type success with a lot of other films up until that point. And I don't know, the similarities are really close. So I think he basically loosely took the Pierre Pasolini film that starred Terence Stamp from the 60s called Teorama, and basically remade it in Japan.
Yeah, now I read that on Wikipedia. I've never heard of that movie before, but
well, when we were thinking about movies to pair up with Visitor Q, my first thought was, well, we should just pair it up with Salò, because it just seems like that sort of extreme, violence and fucking and shit and all
yeah.
all the things that makes a growing boy healthy. But and I wasn't aware of this. I wasn't aware. I've not seen the Pasolini movie. I didn't even know that Pasolini made movies with actors. Like, so when it was like, wow, Terence Stamp, I'm like, yeah, I should check it, but I didn't have time before this podcast to sit down and watch it. So, but I mean, I think just from doing a little reading that the Pasolini film was more about spirituality and consumerism, and it was a bit more sort of its time. And this one seems to be a much more Japanese family life and reality TV and that. So it's kind of neat that when a remake happens and they're sort of looking at their own time periods and their own social context. Of course, you could also just watch. It's Miike, so it's not that deep. So you just watch it as just an extreme shock fest. I mean, the movie looks really grotty and really flat, and it basically looks like someone shot it on their home video camera.
Right. So I guess maybe we can each, as we usually do, kind of just go around, give initial impressions, and just say, if this is our first time watching it or whatever else. But this was my first time watching Visitor Q, and of course I didn't really know anything about it. I just knew anything that was being paired up with Irreversible was probably not going to be the most pleasant watch. And the weird thing is, it kind of starts out almost a little bit innocent in a way. Like, yes, there's a
sensual.
There's a sex scene at the beginning, but I was waiting for it to get nasty, and it never really did. But then about 3/4 of the way through, you start seeing why it has a bit of a reputation. And I guess the thing for me is it did feel very sensationalistic and just trying to check off as many things as possible to sort of gross you out and to shock you. And I did feel like, I guess I kind of got a little bit of the sort of Japanese societal kind of trying to, stick it to the norms of what everybody thinks a family should be or something. But for the most part, I didn't really think this had much behind it at all. I just kind of thought it was a shock fest, and that was it. So that was my initial impression. Jay?
I thought the movie was extremely boring. And it didn't help that I knew that Hell's Kitchen was on while I was watching it.
That does make it difficult to watch.
Yeah.
It is kind of short. I mean, I don't know if I could have lasted more than...
I was checking my display every 10 minutes, waiting for it to be over. I've watched shocking movies. I like watching real life human deaths on YouTube. And I don't know. To me, this just doesn't. Visually, there's nothing interesting. Actually, I'll be fair. The lactation was interesting, but I mean that's basically it. It's like, for me, all there is to talk about in this film is, what did you think of the lactation? And I thought it was cool, but the rest of the movie was pretty fucking boring.
All right, Marina.
Well, those sounds like we all had a similar experience. I'd never seen it before. Didn't really know what to expect because I hadn't seen Irreversible yet. Whoever decided that we needed to see this deserves to be killed. I hated every moment I spent with this film.
It's a good thing we're far away between Iceland and British Columbia.
It's a good thing. No, I wouldn't really kill anybody, but oh man, it was a pain to get through. It was a chore. Just bland. And at some point, 20 minutes in, it's kind of like, yeah, even the violence isn't really doing anything for me. Just didn't work.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me. It wasn't like, oh, I can't believe I had to watch this. It was so sick. It was more like, this is fucking boring. It was uninteresting, and it just was visually uninteresting, and it didn't have anything to say to me, and it just seemed shocking for the sake of being shocking, and I don't know. It just did not do it for me.
All right, James, what were your thoughts?
I bet he loved it.
No, I didn't like this one at all. I just thought it was nauseating, and it was boring, and the feeling of watching a film and knowing that the filmmaker's trying to shock you but failing, you feel embarrassed for the filmmaker, and I just, like everyone else, easily a quarter of the way through, I put the the display on so I could know how much longer I had to deal with this movie before I could go, because it was awful.
Now, when you say that it didn't succeed in shocking you, do you think that it this movie came out in 2001, I guess?
03, I think.
According to IMDb,
Okay,
it says
I'm wrong.
2001, but I don't know. Like, do you think is it a dated thing? Like, was this cutting edge in 2001, and like in 2010, we've just had so much more extreme stuff to shock us?
No, I just think that, I mean, for me, the moment that just sort of drives this point home is where the kid starts doing snow angels in the kitchen floor covered in breast milk. It's just, it was so ridiculous. And I mean, there are some films that genuinely shock me and disturb me, and some newer than this one and some older, but this was just a lousy attempt at something, and I really can't figure out what he was trying to do with this film.
It was worth doing this film just to get that lead-off sentence, James. We're still recovering.
So,
Yeah.
So I've got something I wanted to throw out here. While watching this movie, it did kind of remind me of like a Harmony Korine and or Larry Clark movie.
No.
Well, okay, give me, because I definitely think those movies, especially Harmony Korine's movies, they're a lot more genuine. Like, it feels like he's just kind of...
Maybe Larry Clark, like...
Well, Larry Clark has that movie Bully, which I haven't seen, but I kind of kept thinking, is this actually...
No,
in any way?
Bully isn't as... I don't think as flat-out sensational as this. Bully has a little bit more of a story to it, but...
Okay. So, but what, like, because honestly, this did remind me, especially the aesthetics and the fact that it's shot on like this sort of, camcorder kind of feel. Like, it reminded me of Trash Humpers, and like
Trash Humpers is one of the most genuine found footage films ever made.
Okay.
This is artsy fartsy bullshit. Trash Humpers is not artsy fartsy. All right, I take that back. But I mean, there are images in Trash Humpers and all of Harmony Korine's films that are more inspiring, original, and say more than anything in Visitor Q, except maybe the lactation. But the biggest problem with the movie for me is that it's just boring. Like, when I watch a Harmony Korine film, there's genuine humor in his films. Like, you have to admit, Trash Humpers, even though, it is a very... It can be a tough film for a lot of people to get through. There are genuinely humorous moments in it. And I think there are genuinely emotional moments in Trash Humpers. But this film doesn't have anything like that for me.
See, I found Visitor Q to be very funny. I found a lot of it to be very funny. I mean, it was very broad, but I found... I always find elements in Miike's movies that he's like one of those old-fashioned comedians that will do pretty much anything for a laugh, except he doesn't traffic in what is typically a comedy. I mean, when the husband and wife in Visitor Q decide to go after the bullies, that's, to me, a genuinely funny moment. It's like this family that is completely in their own compartments and, hate each other, basically, or cannot find any way to possibly get along under one roof. As soon as they embrace the violence, they actually more or less come back together as a family, and I find that inherently funny. Like, the husband and wife don't even make eye contact for the first half of the movie, and then they're gleefully, chopping up bodies and doing the thing, and I just find that, of all the things that would bring a husband and wife back together, corpse dismemberment, after the husband had, or rigor mortis in the vagina, it is the final moment that brings this happy family back together. When his rigor mortis necrophilia is combined with her heroin addiction, they find some common ground. And I find that funny. I mean, it's not laugh out loud funny, but I find a lot of the things in this movie to be that kind of funny. Like really broad satire. Not like sharp, smart, just really big, really broad satire.
It's the Robin Williams of the bunch.
Like, I think that's the only thing that kind of saved it from being, like, for me, this isn't like a movie that offended me and I hate it and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I had to sit through this. It was just kind of like a misfire and just kind of, you know, I guess like Jay said, just kind of boring. But I think that's the difference. The fact that it has a little bit of a sense of humor kept it from being like this movie that's genuinely trying to shock me with all this stuff. And I was just kind of like, well, okay, it has this dark humor to it. And I agree there is something in that sort of last 10 minutes that I was kind of like, oh, okay, there was some reason to sit through all this.
The problem with Mike is that he has 5 films on the go. He certainly in this period had 5 films, maybe 2 TV shows and some original video things all on the go at the same time. So a lot of his films may have 1 or 2 striking element to them, but they all feel unfinished because, you know, no one can multitask like that. And so everything suffers. And I find most of his work to be just sort of, it has a half-ass feel. I don't know, sometimes that works. In something like this, where, you know, he's trying, like, he could, in fact, you know, with a little bit of polish and tone and whatever, and maybe more emotion or something, he could have made a film that, you know, really, like, he could have made, I don't know if any of you seen Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Tokyo Sonata, which is kind of the same subject, just without necrophilia and breast milk snow angels. Because it's a serious film and it's really well thought out and scripted, and it has emotional moments and real characters, not just broad waving their arms caricatures. And Mike he's just moving forward.
But this film didn't have any of that stuff. I mean, it didn't have any emotions or actual characters. They were just really, I kept thinking they were like the kinds of people that populate like dirty jokes, like you know, like a one-legged dwarf or something like that. It was like they were barely human. They were barely human. They certainly weren't characters. Anything you could kind of grab hold of.
I think you bring up a great point, James, and that's probably one of my biggest problems with the movie, is that it kind of starts with trying to build some sort of emotional connection to the characters. You know, you have these 2 people, you know, just had sex, obviously prostituting herself or something like it. I mean, you sort of get the feeling that this is going to be some serious, dark film with some heavy material going on behind it. And then you move on to the next scene, and all of a sudden you're like, you've watched 20 minutes of this, and you haven't moved forward, and you've actually lost the characterization you built in the first 10 minutes of the movie. It was at that point that I kind of went, well, what the hell am I watching this for? It's pointless. And that was really disappointing more than anything else. And then it just got boring.
I think you're right, though. The first 10 minutes feels like a different film. It looks different. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the film is consistent as much as it can be.
It makes it feel like it was made up along the way, and he picked this starting point that, you know, was supposed to lead to other things, and then it just lost its way and ended up turning into what it is. It's just a vehicle to do weird things.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like he has these different characters, and he just kind of like keeps parading out, like, okay, a scene where this weird thing happens, a scene where this weird thing happens, and like the only connection is that they're a family, I guess, and that they kind of come together under one roof. But yeah, I mean, I guess I was kind of curious, like, I haven't seen Ichi the Killer, but I know that came out the same year, I believe. And I know that's supposed to be a kind of another shocking, sort of aggressive movie in that way. Like, how would you guys compare Visitor Q to that?
Well, Ichi is got a far less sensical plot. I couldn't. The first time I watched Ichi the Killer, I didn't even understand what was going on, and that's rare. I mean, I watch a lot of movies. I usually plot is not usually the one thing I'm hung up on. I might miss something completely else, but then okay, you watch it again, and it kind of makes a lot more sense. I think it's a different. It's just such a different movie. I mean, Ichi is a manga, and it has sort of those sort of genre elements, whereas I don't think Visitor Q has any what you would normally say genre elements. It's more almost like a piece of performance art. I mean, the whole making it up as you go along is about the best way to describe it. I mean, he had this obviously he had the Pasolini film as a template, but a good case in point is the main guy. Now, I haven't seen how Terrence Stamp does as that drifter character that comes in and shakes the family up, but in this film it's handled quite lazily. Like it's interesting when he meets the father at the train station and just starts hitting him with a rock, but then when he gets to the family abode, the character just sort of loses. Well, you'd think he would be more of a presence or something, considering he's supposed to be the catalyst for everything, and he's just kind of there a lot of the times. And I don't know whether that's a conscious decision or just something that never gelled.
Well, it's something that I was wondering the whole movie, and I don't know, this seems like something you might cross your mind as well, Kurt, but did you think that he was actually a real person, or was he a figment of someone's imagination, or it kind of felt like he was just a character that was representing something, or just somehow either bringing the family together or tearing them apart or something, but it didn't really feel like he was an actual character in the story, because like you said, he's just kind of there in all the scenes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he could just be some sort of ghost character, but I mean, there's not even enough in this movie to really even chew on what that means. He's just whatever, they needed that to happen, so he's there. I mean, it is interesting that at the end of the film he hits the girl with the rock, so he kind of, there's a bookend there where the two characters that start both have to sort of, literally get a knock to the head to wise up. Although, I mean, does the knock to the head to the dad make the dad wise up? He just seems to degenerate further. I guess the one element that I hung on while I'm on the subject of the dad was the fact that the dad works as a news segment, sort of this Japanese life segment, and he seems to be making a documentary on bullying, and there's sort of everyone's sort of bullying everyone, and the whole sort of I don't know, as an outsider, sort of the way Japanese society can go, extreme. I mean, there's a whole subgenres in Japanese film on aimless or drifting youth, and a lot of different filmmakers, genre and regular, have made drifting youth kind of films, and he seems to be kind of making that documentary, and it sort of ties in because he feels like he's getting worse or no one's watching, that he has to just keep upping and upping and upping the bar. So I think that there's one commentary in Visitor Q. It's that how desperate people are to have their media or whatever however they're showing off work, and they'll just keep going to more desperate and more desperate methods. I mean, that's the way it is in reality TV. I mean, certainly in horror movies nowadays, there's that sort of, the next generation doesn't necessarily have to make a better movie. It just has to be a more extreme movie. And you certainly
right.
the torture porn stuff that came out after and became a subgenre, and a lot of the Japanese weird ass shit, it tries to keep. So in a way, it's almost like he made Visitor Q to say, I'm just going to put everything into 84 minutes, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if this movie may have seemed a little bit more, innovative, I guess, when it first came out, because of the fact that it kind of is shot on these handheld cameras, and it deals with this guy who's doing news footage, and like all that kind of stuff happens a lot nowadays. Like we've seen that a ton lately, but maybe back in 2001, maybe it might have been a little bit more interesting. I don't know. It's hard to say having just watched it now, but it's too bad Omar couldn't be here to really give us some insight as to some of the stuff I guess he likes. Apparently he likes the movie, I'm guessing. Unless he just wanted to torture us.
Well, I think in Miike's extraordinarily prolific resume, it's considered one of his lesser films. It's not. It's not a. I mean, maybe there's certain people out there that embrace it. Like I said, I can see a lot of people thinking that the movie is ridiculously funny, and that might be a comment on desensitization. But anything when you take something and you bring it to these sort of way extreme hysterical proportions, anything becomes funny. Like no subject is taboo. Once you've crossed a certain line and you've just kept going crazier and more extreme and whatever, things just, I mean, that's comedy, right? You just exaggerate something like to the point. I mean, if you exaggerate something a little, it's horror. And if you exaggerate it even further, like, from Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2, it's just taken it and exaggerated it so much more that it becomes just a straight out comedy.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. Like, I guess, Jay, you were talking about interesting imagery.
Lactating.
Like the lactating. One thing that I thought was also kind of a cool idea or cool imagery was the whole the bullies that are lighting the fireworks off and shooting them into the house. I thought that was kind of interesting, but again, it's just totally random, and I don't know. Be a good practical joke to play on someone, though.
It actually looked good. It actually looked good on the video just because of the way it.
Yeah,
this film is one of the redeeming factors of this film is it does give you good suggestions for practical jokes to play on people.
Like fake that you're dead, and
yeah,
yeah.
Or the penis stuck in the vagina.
Yeah, definitely. Possibilities are endless.
I will say that one of the scenes that it's still sort of I thought about after the movie was over, and considering it as a whole, it's kind of like, it's just sort of stuck in this, little crappy movie. But when the mother goes off to have her little fling to get money for her addiction, the guy asks her to beat him with a belt. I thought that was sort of interesting that we never got to see her face.
I was a little pissed.
Not that, it means anything, but I don't know. I kind of thought that was an interesting choice. And I don't know if it was just random. It could very well be. But, yeah, I thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah.
The only interesting part of that scene, I thought, was that they'd obviously had sex before she was beating him, and I think that he was putting the cart before the horse there. He had it the wrong way around.
Oh, boy.
Well, the whole actual transaction of them, of the beating, it's so polite, like, can I humbly suggest that you hit me here, here, and here, and yeah, that's what I like, or whatever. It just, again, I find that sort of funny. Like, the whole point of domination is that you should be dominated. You don't, you actually have to ask. It struck me as funny.
Well, I was wondering.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just wondering if, like, it almost seemed like he felt sorry for her and felt like she needed more money. So he was like, well, if you want, I can pay you to whip me too for a bit. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know. I mean, in any other film, that scene and the way that scene plays out would have probably had more meaning. And I mean, it kind of struck me here because here she is getting beaten by her, 12-year-old son. And now you have her in a position of domination, and you don't even get to see her reaction. And I actually felt a little bit cheated. I wanted her to take pleasure from that.
No,
but, that's the thing. It's like you're reading into this movie that really has no meaning. So I don't know.
Well, I think that what he's trying to say at the beginning is that she's off in her own selfish world with the heroin addiction, and her journey over the course of the movie is to become the nurturing mother again, fall back into the, you know, sort of role within the family of being the mother, and hence the copious lactation as the movie moves along, and the fact that, and not only that she like enjoys it. Like, the whole point at the beginning of the movie is that everyone isn't in their roles because none of them can stand their roles. Like, they're all off, you know, not doing what society says to do them, but somehow through all this violence and blah blah blah, they end up all falling back into their roles. And I don't know, maybe that's probably bleak, you know, because you always think of film and art film as being progressive. Not everyone has to go back in their place and do what they're supposed to do because, you know, you're a 40-year-old woman or a 17-year-old boy, because the boy falls into his role. He studies and goes off to school. And,
well, I think that's like a very Japanese thing too, right? Like, it's because they're very much like, you know, this is what you should do, and, you know, you're going to respect sort of the cultural norms, and you're not going to go off and do your own thing. And I guess, I don't know if he's saying it's a good or a bad thing. Like, I guess that's kind of open to interpretation, but he's certainly playing with those ideas. So I guess there's something going on in this movie, but
No.
it just seems like it's...
There isn't. This analysis it's the equivalent of analyzing Norbit, except Norbit is joyful and this is not. Just because it shrouds itself in pain and sex and vile, you know,
body fluids.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it has a message. It's taken a different shallow direction, the opposite shallow direction that something like Norbit takes.
No, I think you're flat out wrong. I think that the message is really. I think the message is really obvious, and like that sort of societal stuff is. It's not even
so
buried.
obvious.
It's so obvious. It's so
obvious that it's not even worth discussing.
Fair enough. I can buy that argument, but you can't say that there's nothing being said in the movie. I think it's being said, you know, with a megaphone pointing into another megaphone. Like, it's just huge and big and broad, and
what's being said is completely secondary to everything that happens on screen. This is an opportunity to watch someone shoot milk out of their tits. That's what it is. That's it. And to me, that's the only thing that I loved.
Well, yeah, and it's like, if we could have a movie with like a story and characters we liked and milk shooting out of breasts.
What did Norbit not have?
Exactly.
No, but I sincerely, I really only think that the lactating is the only interesting thing. And the way it plays out, it seems to me like it was discovered on set. Like someone went up and was like,
a happy accident.
Mr. Takeshi, I thought you should know, Anne, who's our lead actress, she can lactate. He's like, what the fuck?
No, I think it was definitely...
Get a camera on that.
That was in the casting call for sure. Guaranteed.
40-year-old woman.
Well, I was wondering what was going to happen, because she had like massive nipples, and I was like, that's unusual. And then
explained.
Nipples of unusual size. That
they
lactating
like Oscar statues.
They were like full statues.
And I bet that I haven't seen Norbit, but I bet Norbit has something to say about family
and lactation.
But what Norbit has to say about family is disregarded because it's surrounded by joyfulness.
Could be.
I'm sure the message in Norbit is just as obvious as the message in Visitor Q, but it's
I think the message
populist blockbuster film, and You know, it doesn't deserve to be analyzed, where this does, just because it's Japanese and it's shot on video and it doesn't even have cocks in it. Was that a censored version? Did you see?
I
penis?
think that's a Japanese thing.
It's a Japanese thing, and B, it's something that Miike has played with in various films.
That's bullshit.
He sometimes intentionally censors stuff, sometimes he doesn't. It's very weird what he does, but I think even lots of Japanese pornography still censors.
I hate that.
So, but on the whole lactation thing, before we move off away from that,
let's keep going.
that is a common. Like several Miike films have that.
Really?
That's his auteur stamp.
I've only seen Ichi the Killer, and I hated it. And the only thing I remember is the title emerging out of a puddle of semen. That's that movie,
Yep,
right?
yeah,
A man masturbates outside of a window, and the title comes out of it.
It's pretty good. It's a metaphor for filmmaking right there.
You might want to.
So, Kurt, did you see God's Puzzle?
No, I haven't. I mean,
Okay.
I don't even think it's. Did you see it?
I did.
At a festival,
yes.
or
I was going to ask about this white thing that was on the floor of the bedroom, which we couldn't figure out what it was. I'm thinking it might have been milk.
It was semen. Did the movie's title come out of it?
No, sadly.
yeah. Well, Gozu has which would have been around the same time as Visitor Gear. Is just a movie made after Ichi. It has loads of,
Lactation?
it has a guy being born, like a fully grown man being born. So, and there's plenty of lactation.
I might have to dig into his filmography.
Well, actually, the Miike film that I recommend to watch is The Great Yokai War, because it's his only children's film, and it's basically his Harry Potter, and yet he cannot not be who he is. So even though he when in any quest film there has to be some dangerous horde, or I don't know what's the baddie in Harry Potter.
Voldemort.
So he has to be coming back from somewhere. He's banished and he's coming back, or there's some in the Beastmaster, the horde is coming, or there's some. So and someone has to tell the characters that this is the conflict or whatever. So you generally have a teacher or whatever. So in the Great Yokai War, a calf gives birth to a mutant deformed cow fetus that says, the evil is coming. I mean, this is a film that was made for 12-year-old kids, and so it's kind of interesting. So
That
he just
sounds
can't.
more fun.
It is more fun, but he can't not be who he is. That's what he does.
Mm-hmm.
One good thing I can say about the film is that, in all seriousness, the woman who played the news reporter who sort of spurned the father, she played one of the most convincing dead people I've ever seen in movies.
Good point.
They actually killed her for that film. That's what they do.
No, but I thought that sort of vacant stare, I thought it was that was kind of a haunting look she had there, and I thought, well, that's one thing I liked about it anyway.
Well, it is true. I was actually thinking about it at different points. Is this still an actual person, or would they actually build prosthetics for this? I don't know. It just because it was convincing, but especially when her body had to be contorted in all these weird ways. But I don't know if I give it a recommend based on that.
No, that was I just wanted to make sure I had one nice thing to say about the movie.
Yeah.
That was all I could come up with.
Well, I guess for better or for worse, the movie is structured into almost like a series of set pieces. And while they don't always gel together, you do have, obviously if you don't like any of them, well, you're screwed. But, you have the scene at the beginning, and then it quickly moves to this other segment with the rock, and then it moves to the son and the mom hitting, and then to the fireworks. It's very clearly, if you're pissed off or whatever at that scene, something else is going to come along. I mean, the movie's only about it seems like it's long takes, 20, maybe less, long takes. It's the whole movie, which is kind of, it wasn't, I don't know, we just paired it up because it was kind of, this sort of extreme, whatever kind of cinema. But, I mean, it does match up nicely with Irreversible because it's obviously the same sort of big collection of long takes.
Right. Okay, well, I guess, are there any other final thoughts on Visitor Q before we move on then?
The only thing I wanted to add is that watching this kind of reminded me of Cold Fish for some strange reason.
Absolutely.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure if it's just I think part of it is this idea of the family, but the whole chopping up of the body bit sort of brought it rushing back, so... Except Cold Fish is much better.
Yeah, we're probably the only two here that have seen that one. But yeah, Cold Fish is a real movie. I mean, it's a good, well-structured movie, and you're right. It has all the same messages and has all the same, like with the body dismemberment and stuff. I'd be interested to see if the director, the Sion Sono, has any connection or. Like, is he a fan of Visitor Q, or is he not a fan and wanted to make a good version of it, or it's an interesting. I was thinking the same thing when I was watching it. That there's a lot of similarities between those two films.
But does it have lactation?
It reminded. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jack.
Back off on the lactation. Go ahead.
No, it reminded me of Godard's Weekend. Is what I kept thinking of, which I actually enjoy, but. I just thought it was, in its excess, it reminded me of that film.
Reminded me of Norbit.
So it is fascinating that you could get that many. I guess you get out of it what you bring in.
Yeah. No, I guess also. I mean, I don't know how many people would be listening to this, whether they've seen the movie or not. But it does seem like it's a little bit hard to find on DVD. I don't know. Does it have a region 1 release?
Yeah,
or?
it's a very it's swanky.
Yeah.
The region 1 release looks like a Criterion release. It has liner notes. It's like there's an essay with it. It's in a paper, very nicely designed paper case. I found it used in a bin a number of years ago. And I mean, even used, I think I paid like more than I would normally pay for a used, like if I had bought a used Criterion, it was like $15 or whatever. Yeah, I don't know if it's in print or not, but it does have a very Tokyo Shock is the label that that put it out. I don't even know if they're still in business or not, but
I think they are. It sounds familiar, but all right. Well, I guess are we wrapping up our discussion on Visitor Q then?
Yep, yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So let's move on. Let's talk about Gaspar Noé. I hope I'm saying his name right. His film Irreversible, which came out in 2002. Now, do we know who suggested this one?
I think you did.
I did.
Yep.
Ouch.
When we were brainstorming movies around Visitor Q, I don't know why I would have done that. No, actually, I mean, I had seen this. I never saw it in theaters or anything, obviously, but I had seen it at some point and kind of didn't really remember too much other than the key scenes, I think. So I was kind of curious to revisit it, and it is definitely still, I think, a difficult watch. But I think. Especially when compared to Visitor Q, I think there is definitely more of a story. There's some good performances, definitely some interesting cinematography. There's a lot of stuff to appreciate about the movie. It's just one of those movies that I still feel it's hard to say that I genuinely like the movie because again, it puts you through the ringer. But Kurt, what's your take on it? I saw this movie. The North American premiere of the movie, it played at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2002, and it was already infamous because it was booed and walked out of at Cannes, but that happens like seemingly every other movie. But they showed it at the Uptown Theater, back if anyone remembers the Uptown, and it's a 1,000-seat theater, and I would say a third of the audience walked out. And I mean, that to any movie, that's a huge walkout. Like usually maybe you'll see, even in extreme movies, you'll see 5 or 10 people leave. But to have a third of the theater walk out, and then by the time we got to the end of the movie, I mean, Gaspar was there to do a Q&A. There were maybe 40 people that stayed. And that really is an interesting comment. I find at film festivals, it's an interesting commentary. It's certainly how Toronto responds to a film. The more people that stay for the Q&A, the more people that were really into the movie. If you get a whole theater and not a person leaves and everyone stays for the Q&A, that's rare. So I remember there was very few people that stayed for that. But my reaction to it at the beginning was this was the first movie that actually made me nauseous, and particularly the opening minutes with the noise. Like I guess they play a certain frequency that
I believe it's called the brown noise. It makes you poop.
It's a riot quelling frequency that he uses in the opening scenes. And the buddy that I was with never, like, he liked to go to the film festival, but he never he only wanted to see, like, you know, movies early. He didn't want to, he wasn't like super adventurous, and I think he only stayed because I wasn't leaving. And to this day, that's a movie that he brings up anytime he's pissed off about some movie experience or whatever. So, but I mean, I flat out love the movie. I think it's really good. It uses the backwards time thing as smart and effective as Memento. It just differently. And yeah, it's not like you said, it's not a movie that you enjoy watching, but I think it's a really, this type of movie seems that as much as something like Visitor Q in the way it's made could only be made in Japan, this movie feels like it could only be made in France or maybe Belgium, but whatever. But yeah, and I had not rewatched it, so I had only had that one theatrical experience, and yeah, so it was really good, and it confirmed to me on rewatching it just how damn good of a movie it is.
Okay, Jay.
I like the movie as well. I think that it's I think pairing this with Visitor Q does this a disservice to just link the two because they're both shocking. I think Visitor Q is shocking with nothing behind it, but this has something behind it, and I think that the techniques that are used are used in a very effective way, and there's a lot of great special effects work in this film that is some of the most convincing and shocking CG that I've seen.
Yeah.
There's a CG penis in the movie. Yeah, I mean, I like it just as a visceral experience. And the whole hard to watch thing, I think it does just come from the, like you said, the noise and the camera flipping around and everything. And I don't kind of like that. I think it's challenging in a good way, not in a obnoxious, pretentious, self-indulgent way. There's a purpose for the way it's moving the camera and trying to make you feel. It's like a ride. It's an emotional thrill ride.
It's true. I mean, the one thing I'll say is that I kind of have a feeling, though, seeing it in the theater is a very different experience, because even when I was watching it here, like, I found when the camera is kind of like swinging around and stuff, after a while I just kind of had to look away on occasion, and I'm just thinking, if this was on the big screen in front of me, like, there's no escape from that, you know. But obviously that's probably with any movie. Marina, what were your thoughts?
I'm sort of on the same boat with you guys. It was the first time that I'd ever seen it, and definitely not a pleasant experience, but a film I really do like. And I agree. I think it has quite a bit to say, and the way that it's made works into that. But wow, it was hard to watch. And for the first 15 minutes, I'm like, did I totally missed something. And it was for that reason I kept having to look away, because, I mean, few films really make me ill, and this one did. I mean, I was 10 minutes in, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get a headache. I gotta close my eyes. And then it moves on a little bit more. I'm like, okay, did I miss part of the story? And then I sort of figured out the whole telling the story backwards. But it took me a while for it to click in. But no, generally, I just really, really, really like this movie a lot.
Okay, James?
Well, I guess I have mixed feelings about it, but I think the film really has a lot going for it. I thought that the technique used, the sort of reverse narrative, was really interesting, and at times it sort of kept you above the drama and the sort of gut-wrenching horror of some elements of the film, but at other times it had the effect of just being really absorbing. I think it hit its stride at the point where, if I remember the characters' names, Pierre and Marcus are sort of chasing one another around that party, and Alex is kind of off on her own and everything, and the sort of hyper real camera technique that they were using, and it was just blowing up at that point. And so there's a lot I really enjoyed about it, but there was a lot of stuff I didn't care for. I think there were some things that were excessive, but overall I would say that I enjoyed it.
Okay, well, now one thing I wanted to mention, like Kurt, you had already brought up sort of the comparison to Memento, and I kind of seem to remember, like, this movie came out like a year after Memento, and I don't know, I could be crazy, but I seem to remember, like, one of the first things I heard about it was people saying that it was a quote-unquote Memento knockoff, which is obviously completely, like, to write it off based on that is pretty lame, but it is kind of interesting that it came out around the same time as Memento. But obviously, like, the fact that the title is Irreversible, the fact that it even starts with the credits, the end credits going backwards, I thought was really interesting. And so, like, yeah, I think the use of the backwards time in this movie is really cool, especially because it's a revenge movie, but you see the revenge before you even know what they're getting revenge for. So it's like you don't really get the pay, like in a revenge movie. At the end, you feel like vindicated, like, yes, that person got what was coming to them, and you're kind of robbed of that in this movie.
Well, in this movie, Vincent Cassel is the monster at the beginning. He's the guy that's completely off his hook. He's just completely going crazy. And when his buddy, who actually, I think even when they're in chaos and you can't tell what's going on in the gay club and they're going around and it's almost like a horror funhouse. It's just one sort of scattered image after, like, almost strobe lighted and so forth. But then the first thing I think that you can really see once you're in that club is when he picks up the fire extinguisher and the camera stops for a few minutes so that they can indulge in beating the guy to, like,
destruction of a head.
Jay mentioned that it was CGI augmented, and one of the probably the most impressive things about Irreversible is that it doesn't feel like a movie that would have any CGI in it, and everything is augmented, but it's done in the sort of David Fincher way that you're not ever supposed to know. But I don't think the movie almost never shows it seems that way. When he beats that guy with the fire extinguisher, I remember in 2002, I'm like, that might qualify as the most visceral thing I've ever seen on screen. And I mean, I've seen things that are conceptually worse, but it's the way this is filmed. It's so graphic and inhuman and brutal, and it's totally playing for keeps, and it does not want you to enjoy that scene at all. There's no scene of violence in this movie that the filmmaker ever wants you to enjoy. And which I think is the opposite of Visitor Q, where it's kind of played for funny. In this movie, and because you don't know what's going on, these guys just beat this guy to death. You don't have that release that you would have if it's Denzel Washington in that Tony Scott movie,
Man on Fire,
where everyone is, like, actually bloodthirsty by the end, and it's like, he kills someone graphically and everyone fist pumps. And here it's not the same. And of course, the height of the irony of that scene is that they don't even kill the right guy.
Well, I was going to ask that because I wasn't sure, but that I mean, I guess that's another interesting thing. I mean, you
don't know at that point. Like, you don't know anything.
You can't remember what that guy looks like because you just see him on screen for a second and then he's like obliterated, and then later on you're kind of like, but was it the real guy?
The guy that they were supposed to kill, the Latenya, the tapeworm or whatever, the pimp.
Yeah.
He's standing beside him. Like, he basically says it's that guy.
Oh, okay.
And so they kill that guy. And it's really hard on a single viewing. It's really hard to make that connection. I mean, for years I thought, and I've been corrected 4 or 5 times, I thought just from the one-off film watching that it was Vincent Cassel that beat the guy. But it's even worse when it's Pierre, because he seems to be the voice of reason in this movie, and the fact that he's just that I mean, the whole movie is about how far can you be pushed before you just become a monster, and that, I guess, was his breaking point. He was the voice of reason until they got right down to that point. The horror was just so much that he just snapped, and he just went to town with that thing.
Yeah, well, I think, too, like, one of the interesting things is, like, there is, as it's working backwards, you know, at first there's the mystery of, well, what happened? Why are they trying to kill this guy? But then after the rape scene happens, you know, I'm kind of thinking, well, why am I still watching this? Like, is this movie over? Like, why do I care about how this started? And then, of course, there's the twist at the end with that she's pregnant or whatever. But there are other little things that you're finding out. And I think one of those things is that Pierre, you know, initially you just know that, what's the other guy's name? Vincent Cassel's character? Marcus. You just know that Marcus, it was his girlfriend that got raped or whatever, and you're kind of just thinking Pierre's along for the ride, but then you slowly find out that he actually had a relationship with her, and it becomes interesting because you kind of realize why he was the one who came in and snapped, and although the other guy was getting beat up, I guess, too, but so yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting little things that you're still curious to find out about as you kind of continue watching it towards the end of the film.
Well, and oddly enough, the movie gets more violent as it goes by. Not in the normal sense of violence of you see something and it's violent, but the more it goes back, and, you know, as the characters become more grounded because they're not, you know, it's past before crisis and whatever. Like, there's a huge take. It's probably the second last, maybe the third last shot of the movie. It's got to be 12 to 15 minutes long of Monica Bellucci and Vincent Cassel just preparing to go to the party, and they get up, they put some music on, they dance, they talk, it's just very intimate, and it actually feels, to me, it feels very realistically intimate. Movies don't always capture the just two people in a room interacting with each other all that well, and I think, I mean, these two are married as well, so it that may help, it may not, but that scene, it's like watching United 93. I mean, United 93 works as a thriller because you know it's based on a true story and you know what's going to happen eventually. I mean, otherwise the movie would just be boring. But because you have this loaded sense of you know what's going to happen, it makes everything start to achieve different contrasts and resonances and whatever. And because they give you everything at the end of the movie backwards, now you know that this couple that has this good intimate relationship, that's what's going to happen to them. And then when it scales back further and she takes her pregnancy test and she knows that she's pregnant but hasn't told her boyfriend yet, then you know, it just keeps adding more and more to the and oddly enough, I mean, the movie's so smartly built that hundreds of details are foreshadowed the wrong way. Like, they're in the later scenes of the movie, she has the conversation with the pregnant woman, and then they're talking about the book she's reading, and there's just a lot of things that if you showed the movie the other way around, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. And that's what pisses me off when people write this movie off as being gimmicky. This is one of the most effective uses of backward narrative because it actually is commentating on how you watch a movie and how the movie told backwards is a radically different experience, and how you process, like you said, violence or how you deal with exposition or everything. Like, it's actually a movie, like a critical movie of how movies are watched, and it's just an extra layer on top of everything else.
Yeah, and I think also there is thematic ties, just the fact that you can take revenge on someone, but it doesn't change what happened, you know what I mean? Like, there's no going back from it. And much like Memento, uses its backwards narrative in a thematic way, I think this does too. So I think they're both pretty brilliant in that way.
Yeah, I guess it just works.
You got the bad mic stand this time.
Yeah, I feel like Freddie Mercury. It just works because it places the weight on not on the violence, the act of revenge, but on what they lost, I guess. Like, it's interesting that you come to the end and you're left depressed on more of a lighter note than where you come in the beginning, and that's a powerful thing. Like, to be left, like what you leave the film with is probably more depressing than what you would have if it ended with him killing the guy. You would have, I mean, this is a very obvious statement, but like you said, with people saying that it's a gimmick, it's so obvious that it's not. I mean, it puts a completely different spin on how you leave the film, like, and the images that you're left with, and what they now represent. They represent it's happiness that's going to turn to shit. And I think it's the same with United 93. Like, a film like that, people could very easily say, well, it's how it's going to end, and it's not really, how can they build any drama out of that? But it works exactly because you know how it's going to end. And the fight at the end on the plane works even more because you know how it's going to end, but it seems like they're so close to like taking over the terrorists. But so it is interesting. It's an interesting idea of playing with what it's like the bomb under the table thing. Like,
it never goes off.
Yeah.
But, and then the two statements, like the movie's called Irreversible, which obviously is, regardless of how happy they were, this is going to happen. And two, the final title card is that time destroys all things, which, I mean, in a way, it comes across as this so brutally French nihilistic, but on the other way, it sort of takes the film and says, yes, you just watched a horrific, violent thing, but in a way, things are constantly changing anyway, and that, people don't realize when they have a, like a great day where they go out and they build like a couple snow forts and throw snowballs around, and it's
Snow
happy,
angel and breast milk.
There you go. But if you think about it, you go, "Oh, that was great, and we'll do it again next year and next year." But really, if at the end of a life, if you added up the number of times you did it, it probably adds up to like 3 or 4, and you have the sense that you're always going to have more time to do all these things, and of course you're going to have all these other things, but really a lot of these moments only happen once or twice. And it's interesting that it actually doesn't just say this couple is doomed because of the violence that's in the future, but any moment of you sitting, like, reading your book in the park on a blanket is a transient thing, and something else is going to come along and disturb that. Before you know it, you're on your deathbed and you're like, I wish I made more snow forts.
I'm actually quite impressed with Kurt's optimistic feeling of the ending of the movie. You're usually the one that's the pessimist in the group.
It was all a dream.
My feeling with the ending of this film is exactly in line with Sean's and Jay's. It really feels like you're not robbed of some sort of the revenge and the feeling that they got what was coming to them. It really, you do feel worse coming out of it than you did going in. And I mean, you're feeling pretty shitty when you go in, because I mean, there's a whole shitload of violence going on screen that it's hard to comprehend what's going on, which is interesting in its own way. But yeah, coming out of it, it was kind of like, it was a bit of a mind fuck. It's like, okay, I just watched that entire movie and I feel worse now about life than I did when I started this movie and I was completely lost with what was going on. Like, it's uncommon. And there aren't a lot of filmmakers that make me uncomfortable. I think Gaspar Noé is one that does. It's just, I feel uncomfortable when I watch his films.
I think what he does is a better way of what other filmmakers might clumsily handle as someone getting revenge at the end of the film and then cutting to a montage of all the best moments in their lives as he's killing the person or something, where they're trying to connect the revenge with this person is still dead and still gone. Whereas the way this is structured, it's a more graceful way of doing that, where you end up at the end and you're left with the image of the person that is going to be killed, and it's completely unsatisfying that they're going to, well, aside from the wrong person thing, but it's completely unsatisfying knowing that there's going to be revenge taken, because you're still left with the fact that this person is dead, and it robs you of any gratification.
Well, two things on that. One, it is ironic that he kills the wrong person, but ultimately it really doesn't matter because of that. And two, it's rare that a filmmaker has that much faith in their audience that they will, like you said, like, it's easy to cut back and forth and connect the two with the obvious editing techniques. It's like, basically, that's when cinema became cinema, when someone figured, you can put two things together. But to do it over the span of 90 minutes, and it's a grueling 90 minutes with a lot of things going on, it puts an incredible amount of faith in the audience. And obviously, I think it was, not to sound like a snob, but I mean, not everyone gets that. I think that's the people that say gimmick, like, fundamentally missed the point of the movie.
Well, also, interesting kind of quote here from Roger Ebert, because, like, I mean, a lot of people look at this movie and just say it's gratuitous violence and all this stuff, and I think in Ebert's review he actually called it a very moral movie, because it shows you the vengeance before the acts that inspired the vengeance, right? So you're thinking about the implications of the violence as opposed to just reveling in it, I guess. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, like, you can take this movie at face value and just think, because it's so violent, that it's just a horrible, demeaning piece of work or something. But it's, clearly there's stuff going on here, and there's thought put into it, and doesn't make it necessarily more pleasant to watch, but it certainly gives it value, I think.
James, you're awful quiet back there.
Well, I know you guys have done such an excellent job of covering it. I'm not sure I'm out of things to contribute, but I second,
That's the most pregnant pause we've ever had. What's he gonna second?
No, I didn't really like the film Memento, and I saw it well after the fact of its kind of the excitement that surrounded it when it came out, and I guess I never made the link between the two. Yeah, I sort of feel like the kid at the back of the class, right now.
Well, did you like this more than Memento, or less?
Oh, no, I like this one. I didn't think much of Memento. I didn't really like it at all, really. But this had so much more going for it than Visitor Q, just because the character is the character and the sentiment and everything is exposed in such a novel way, but it's effectively done. But at the end of it, yeah, you do feel worse than you do at the beginning. But it's just interesting how things all fall into place, and it's an interesting comment on film, on the structure of the narrative, because I can't remember if this was a discussion we had before, or at some point we talked about how important the ending is to a film, and in this one, the film ends for sure, but that's not the ending of the film. The ending of the film comes at the beginning, but they managed to keep everything in balance, so
it feels like a natural ending.
Yeah, I mean, if I dare say closure, I don't know if I want to say that though, but because I don't know if you actually get that here, but that you find that point of resolution at some point in the film before the film ends, but nonetheless there is an end point to the film.
Now, has anyone seen I Stand Alone or Carnet or Enter the Void?
No.
It's been a long... No one... Okay. It's been a long time since I've seen his first two films, but I know I've seen Enter the Void a little more recently, and the editing style in this movie, and I think one of the things that makes Noé's films even more grueling to watch is that he doesn't ever cut. He cuts, but they're hidden very elegantly. In the crazy camera movement at the beginning, he can do all sorts of cuts just because of the way the camera is so nonsensical and it's so dark. Anytime there's one frame of blackness, you could cut. But in here, he always does spin the camera
out of the scene,
and it's digitally smoothened to the point where it feels so. I don't know. I think when the film has a lot of cuts, it lets the audience off a hook. Next scene, whatever. But when you're watching one long take, when it's a literal long take, like the rape, of course, that scene, it was funny when that movie came out because everyone had a different length. It has a 20-minute rape scene. It's got a 9-minute rape. Everyone had because the length of that scene is not the literal clock. The length of that scene is how long it feels when you're watching it. But the whole movie feels like one take, and Enter the Void, which is a 3-hour film or 2 hours and 40-minute film, is also done with a gliding, no cuts, no obvious cuts movie, and that's just very. Usually, it's a formal challenge like running time or rope or whatever. But in no way, he's actually using it as an emotional effect on the viewer, and I think that's far more interesting to me than just saying, we wanted to challenge the production to see if we could shoot this one long movie and hide all the cuts. This is a much more interesting way to do it, and I think Irreversible has a noticeable effect, even when the camera's stable. Obviously the movie starts really violent, so the camera's really violent, and then as you keep pulling back and the narrative becomes more stable, they're at a party, they're on a subway, the camera becomes more stable, but he's still not cutting, and you feel that it just has a different flow than other movies, and when you layer that in with the violence that you see on the screen, the backwards narrative, he's really, for a second film, it's a really impressive achievement for just the second film out of the gate, because it's almost like this would be your masterpiece in a normal thing, because you pull so many elements maybe that you learn over making a bunch of films, but I mean he's got it all going on, and it blows my mind that he actually has that he trumps this movie with Enter the Void, which I think is an even better film. And I don't think there's anywhere that he can go. I'd love to find the place that he can, if he can go higher, but after Enter the Void, he's got, as far as I'm concerned, the filmmaker's got nowhere to go. That's it.
He should probably kill himself.
Yep, just kill yourself. Throw yourself off a bridge, in a river, whatever. And given given the type of movies he makes, that doesn't seem too far out of the realm of possibility.
Gaspar, for our sake, just kill yourself.
For the art's sake.
I just have a couple of comments to what Kurt just said, and the first one is the camera sort of going out of frame as we're moving from one piece of the story to the next. And it's interesting because it felt to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that that transition seemed to take longer as we went further and further back in time. Like that last transition between the bedroom scene and when we then see Alex in bed sort of before anything ever happens, that transition seems even longer than all the other ones.
It's because you're admiring that 2001 Kubrick poster.
Well, I think he was more interested with her boobs, personally, but that's just me. And the other thing is, it seems interesting. You mentioned that the camera seems to be more violent when there's more violence going on. But if I remember correctly, I mean, that rape scene is, to me, and maybe it's because I'm a woman, it's more violent than the scene that opens the film. And the camera is almost stationary for the whole thing.
Yeah, but that's because we want to see.
Well, I think like there is some camera movement in that though. Like I remember the one thing that really kind of shocked me is when he actually is picking up her head and slamming it into the ground, and then the camera rotates around so you can see that. Like that was pretty deliberate. But I mean, yeah, you're right. That the camera's like it is kind of weird even in the opening scene with the fire extinguisher. I mean, the camera's moving around everywhere. But as soon as they start smashing some guy's face in, we better stop because we really want to see that. But
I think it's her spirit cam for the first half. After she's raped, her spirit just swirls around until the guy gets his head crushed in.
True.
Spirit cam.
Yeah, it is interesting though that, I mean, there's, for a movie that is going back in time like that, like, I think the most natural thing would be to actually cut and have something. Like, I know Memento had, like, the black and white scenes to sort of separate as you went back in time. But just the idea of doing one long continuous shot and you're jumping back in time is such it's an interesting thing to try. And it does work in the sense that it never, like you said, never lets you off the hook. So, but actually one thing in regards to editing and how brutal some of the violence is, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but like specifically when the fire extinguisher is being swung, or when Monica Bellucci was having her like when she was getting kicked and stuff, it seemed like he kind of like dropped frames in there to like speed it up even faster and make it more violent.
I wonder if that's actual CGI bridging.
It could be, yeah. But I mean, like there's definitely like a slight flicker, like in a visual.
That's a pretty common.
Is it
thing?
I'm sure there's been. I seem to remember discussing this in another movie, like that's come out in the past year, where
you would make an edit without having cuts. So you'd basically you'd
drop a frame to make a punch feel more forceful.
Yeah. Well, it works. But
well, I think people are shocked, but like the rape sequence, people are shocked by the idea. Like it's in a public space. There's at one point early on in the rape, a guy and he's in the frame enough that the filmmaker is making sure that you, even though you may be focused on what's happening at the forefront, you're very much aware that someone comes in fairly early and looks and lingers and then leaves, and it's in a public space, like they're right under a highway, and it's designed to give you that maximum psychological effect, more so than the physical. I mean, it's very brutal and raw physically, and like you said, the camera is like it's unflinching. Like the fact that the camera's not moving is in a way that the filmmaker's saying, no, you're gonna stay and you're gonna watch this unless you walk out. But again, with Noé, it's easy to write something off as being provocative for provocative sake, but there's a lot of consideration that goes into that scene. Like even the fact that he painted the corridor, the underpass red. Like, I mean, they didn't find that location.
Egyptian red.
Yeah, absolutely. The Tuscan sunset. But and the camera, I believe, I think it is for some of that scene when she's walking is canted. Yeah, there's just a lot of that stuff, and I mean, I think a lot of filmmakers use these things, and they don't really have a sense of why they're using it. They're using it because it looks cool, or it's going to make the scene pop or something. But Noe has a lot of. It seems to me that he has like emotional or even like character building with framing. Like the one scene that really struck out watching a second time was when she goes to hail the cab, or when she leaves the party. The camera has that sort of stalking her aspect, which Darren Aronofsky uses both in The Rustler and Black Swan. And I mean, when Aronofsky used it, I thought, oh yeah, and very few filmmakers use that sort of, I'm just going to follow this person with a steady cam for no reason other than we're going to watch them walking. And Noé uses it very effectively. And I mean, you kind of, with everything in this movie, since you know what's going to happen, he can do anything and load it up. And I like that. I think, I guess if everyone used this, if this was used often, it would become old really fast. But there's certainly more things that could be done with it. But he does a lot with it.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we're out of things to say at this point, but I mean, I was just gonna say. I mean, I think it's been a few years since the movie came out, and like I don't know if people are still talking about it, but I think it's definitely kind of it's a movie you don't forget watching. That's for sure. And I mean, I think it still works. It's still pretty.
I think it's talked about a lot still. I still think that this movie comes up in conversation for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes it comes up for shocking. Sometimes it comes up as a rape by rape comparison in a way, or backwards narrative. There's a lot of reasons why, and I don't know. I don't know if. I'm curious where it stands and how people feel about it. I was actually surprised that we're sort of all on the same page. I thought, there's going to be one person. Well, I guess they all left.
Yeah, that's why it's too bad. Like, I really wanted Andrew to just come on the show anyway because, I mean, he's seen the movie, so I don't know why he couldn't have just talked about it anyway, right? Like, he just didn't want to watch it again. Is that right?
Yeah, he didn't want to watch either of them again. He had seen both.
What a wuss. But interestingly enough, Irreversible is in, I have one of those, like 1001 movies to see before you die books. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a few different books like that, but the one I have actually has Irreversible in it. And when I was flipping through it and I saw that movie in it, that was the one that convinced me that, okay, I'm going to pick up this book because I was just so surprised to see it in there. So apparently some people do consider it a pretty important movie in some ways.
The final scene in the movie when they use Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, which curiously enough is the opening track in The Fall. I'd forgotten that piece of music was used, and I'm convinced now that even though we're praising this movie, you can set anything to that music and it's instantly fucking awesome. I'm gonna have like my kids eating cereal and I'm gonna put that music on and people are gonna look at it and go, that shit is profound. But that song, that musical, I mean, we should do Immortal Beloved and Zardoz because I know they both use that, but they both have that song as a signature scene as well. It's a great piece of music, and I don't know, I didn't remember that from watching it the first time, but it just sort of popped out this time.
I think we should definitely do Zardoz, yeah.
I'm totally game. I love that movie.
I love Zardoz as well.
All right, so final thoughts on Irreversible?
Well, I was thinking that maybe as a closer, we could all go around and say which movies have really disgusted us to a great deal.
Okay.
Like our most...
comparing it to like other extreme movies?
No, just whatever movies are on the top of our list of films that have been the hardest to sit through from a...
Well, I can say, and I guess this is kind of cheating in a way, but there's only 2 movies that I actually became physically nauseous in the theater watching. And one was The Hurt Locker, which was because I was like in the front row and it was so shaky and I couldn't handle it. But the other one was The Exorcist, and it was the new version of The Exorcist. And there's the scene where she's getting like blood work done and stuff, and they actually have like blood spurting from her neck at one point. And that, for some reason, like I had to like look away from the screen for like 5 or 10 minutes. Like I don't know, something about blood spurting from a vein really bothers me.
Lots of people quote that scene in the hospital, which is funny because the movie has like all sorts of crazy ass shit happening at different times. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people quote that hospital scene as being one of the most disturbing scenes in the movie.
I mean, there's a lot of shit being done to her.
Because you can kind of sort of relate to it. I know, like, the first Jackass movie, the biggest reaction I saw in the theater that I got was when they're self-administering paper cuts. And you think, here's a movie where they're doing all sorts of absolutely insanely dangerous shit, and just a bunch of guys in the room with a sheet of paper voluntarily, like, on the webbing or whether the skin between their fingers or whatever, giving them cuts. It's because you can relate to it. I don't know how many people can relate to Irreversible, but I guess it's close enough that you can extrapolate a bit, and
yeah, for sure. All right, Marina?
On a purely gross me out, I can't believe I'm watching this, Tom Six's The Human Centipede, which I had to watch in 2 sittings because something in my head just was not working with the visualization. It was just a little bit too much. It actually made me physically ill. And thematically, I would have to say the most difficult thing I've ever seen was probably The Free Will, a German film from a couple of years ago.
Free Willy? What?
No, The Free Will.
Oh.
Matthias Glasner's film.
yeah, I've seen that.
I think
I couldn't
Free
even
Willy
finish.
thematically is pretty hard to sit through.
I couldn't even finish. I couldn't even finish The Free Will. It's such a hard movie to watch.
Really?
It's long too, so it's like almost 3 hours. So after the 2 hour mark, I'm just walking away. I don't know if I had a physical reaction. I just like, there's nothing I'm gonna gain from. It's weird because I'll watch some really dumb, awful stuff, but that one, I remember I felt bad. The guys from Benton Films, which are like a super boutique label, sent me like review copy, and I mean they do it like Criterion, so they're sending you the full, like, gorgeously packaged or whatever. And I was gonna review it on Twitch, and I just couldn't finish the darn movie, and then they took me off their list. Ouch! But I couldn't finish the movie.
James, you got anything to share with us?
I would think probably the only one that I almost didn't make through was when I attended a screening of a bunch of Stan Brackage's short works, and one of the films featured was a short called "The Pleasure of Seeing with One's Own Eyes," and it's I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes of nothing but cadavers being cut into pieces. And I guess the effect is, you see subjectifying the human body, and that's probably the most familiar object. So it's a very unsettling experience, but on top of all that, it's just incredibly gross. And I almost didn't make it through that.
So you didn't go back for Autopsy, which is another one of his shorts?
Luckily, it was only 7 minutes.
Yeah, I wish that Visitor Q had only been 7 minutes long. But I don't know if they showed Autopsy, but they showed a few of them, but that was the one that was really striking.
Okay. Jay, did you share yours?
No, I'd have a couple. I think the paper cut thing in Jackass is a good example, but in the recent one, the sweat drink was pretty hard to sit through.
Yeah.
One of the films that I had nominated for the poll that I think would have been a good mix in this Africa Adio, the documentary, is very hard to sit through. It's a controversial piece of filmmaking, and it's so well crafted, and it is a very interesting and enthralling watch. But there are moments in it that, it's made by the guys who did Mondo Cane, and they're documenting the Africa falling apart essentially after the British leave, and but they can't resist just throwing in these huge sections of just the grossest and most disgusting, like there's extended sequences of mass hunts of the wildlife of Africa. And if it's not bad enough to watch like a bunch of people surround a hippo and spear it to death, they follow it up by showing them like cut a hippo fetus out of it and like display it. And it's like stuff like that where they just like, they know we got to add the hippo fetus. That's going to sell a couple more tickets. And then of course there's lots of human death in it as well. But yeah, that would be one of them. There was another, but I can't remember what it was now, so I'll just stick with that.
Well, I think Jay's onto something with the glossy. For some reason, when gore is done, it's weird. You'd think if it was just done raw and whatever, it would have more impact. But I find like probably the grossest, or the movie I found hardest to watch, just from visceral things. I have this thing with vomiting on screen, and there's I'm sure there's a compilation on YouTube of like 20 minutes of shots. Like vomiting in film is surprisingly common. Like people throw up all the time, and some are better at depicting it than others. But there's a Hungarian movie called Taxidermia. It's not even that old. It's like 2006, I think, and there's vomiting in that, and it's like a Kubrickian like sideways tracking shot of an eating contest, and all the guys have to, after they've gorged and done the thing, they have to purge. And so you've got this slow tracking shot of 5 really robust sized men in red tights vomiting at the camera with no cuts or anything. So it's not like the typical like Stand By Me where there's like a hose or something, or in a typical movie they'll fill the actor's mouth with some milk and whatever and just have them cough and spit. Like this is I don't know how they did it, but it's effective enough, and that's not the grossest image in the movie, but that's certainly one that affected me. And then there's a scene later on where there's a guy, it's the same overeating guy, but this is many years on because the movie's in like 3 different chapters, and he's gotten so grotesquely fat from eating candy bars that like his cats eat him to death, and it's just it's a special effect. It's like a prosthetic, practical effect, and I don't know if that even makes it worse. But the thing about Taxidermia is, I think it's out on Blu-ray. It's a glossy, well-made, like cinematographer's wet dream kind of movie. So it's just weird to see that type of stuff in that context. Like if you watch something like Faces of Death or whatever, it's got that sort of found footage, and even the stuff that's faked is faked to look like found footage. Whereas here's a guy, with a huge lighting department and coordinating a lot of things, and I guess there's a self-mutilate, like the movie of another scene in the movie has a guy that builds a machine that allows him to taxidermy himself while he's still alive, and it's the camera just lingers over it, and it's weird. It's like slick entertainment, but at the same point it's really hard to watch.
It's like big budget films that have graphic sex scenes that are strange, seeing actual penetration or something that isn't shot on mini DV, like in Antichrist or or Brown Bunny, or like an artfully filmed pornographic sequence is an unusual experience as well. But the other film I just remembered was Tears of Gaza at TIFF, where there was tons of walkouts during that documentary. It's a very graphic film.
When you're talking about vomiting, Kurt, I thought for sure you were going to say Problem Child 2.
That is a classic sequence.
Is that the one with Macaulay Culkin?
No,
I'm not sure.
that's Home Alone.
What? No. No, there's one. It's funny that you mentioned that. I don't know if The Good Son, is that a Macaulay Culkin film?
Yeah.
Where he has a dummy that he calls Mr. Highwayman, and he throws the dummy off the bridge and causes a car. That scene's actually very visceral. Like, you actually tighten up. I don't know if that movie, if anyone watches that anymore.
Tightened up.
Like, just to see someone, like, because you know that's exactly what would happen if you have a flowing fast traffic but dense and you threw a dummy in there, then someone's going to swerve. Like, what else would you do? And that's pretty disturbing. I guess there's one thing I forgot to say about Irreversible, though. At one point, like, the two actors, the main actors, Monica Bellucci and Vincent Cassel, are two of the biggest actors in France. And I mean, they both do like more, I guess, extreme cinema. Like, they're not. It's not like the Hollywood studio system where, you know, you're not going to have certain actors do really graphic movies. They do it a little bit more, but I was, at the time when I saw it, I was trying to think of what the analog would be in Hollywood to have two. It would be like, you know, like, I don't know if Vincent Cassel. At first, I thought I was trying to equate like Vincent Cassel to Tom Hanks, which is not really. They're both at that level of fame and popularity, but they're not quite right. But now in 2010. I would always kind of think that if it was Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in that, and it sort of broke my whole argument down, because, you know, on some level I could actually see those actors make that movie.
Yeah, I think they would actually work.
Like, it would actually, it actually might work. I guess in the early 20th century, you may have said like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, but then they did the Kubrick movie. So, but. Yeah, I actually, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie might actually work in that movie. So it's not like a movie that could not be. I don't want it to be remade. I mean, it was done exactly perfect the first time around. But I always had this thing that you watch some foreign films or you watch extreme films, and I guess because you're raised on Hollywood movies, you tend to go, oh, I wonder, they're not going to do that in Hollywood, or they're going to fuck that up if they do it in Hollywood. It's just an instant reaction that I have, or whatever. And but it's interesting that now, thinking about Irreversible, I'm actually thinking, you know what, someone in Hollywood could probably give it a go and actually do. Yeah, you're not going to beat this movie, because why remake the movies that are done right? But yeah, probably.
Well, but are you saying, though, that, like, do you think French audiences, like, do you think maybe for them this movie wasn't as visceral for some reason because they're bigger stars there, and somehow that took them out of it a little bit, or something like that?
I think
Maybe.
Kurt's saying that when he watches this movie.
Oh, Christ.
Carry on, Matt. Welcome to the party. Oh, he's just gonna tease.
How's it going,
He's
fella?
got the volleyball giggles.
I do. Well, I mean, first off, you're talking about disturbing images. I come home and James's pants are off, and I think that's a chinchilla. I really don't know what that is.
Is there any
that
peanut butter? Can you tell us if there's any peanut butter?
What is that, James?
Oh dear.
What do you do when I'm not here?
He looks
I
for the
know you
giant
listen to-
eyeball.
I know you do that.
This sounds like a private conversation.
They're like a married couple.
These guys need to have their own reality show.
Embarrassed him now.
All right, well, Matt, you joined us just in time to wrap up our conversation about Irreversible. Do you have any final thoughts?
On Irreversible,
Yeah.
it is one of the most boring movies I've ever seen.
There we go.
And on that note,
Yeah. So I guess we should mention for the next episode, Matt, you may be interested to hear the movies that we've decided upon.
Okay.
So we're going to be doing F for Fake, and we're going to pair it with Catfish. What do you think
really?
about? What do you think about that?
Interesting.
Yeah, so it looks like Catfish comes out on DVD January 4th, so that's probably around the time we'll be doing the next episode, or maybe a little after that, I don't know.
It won't be before.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. If we do it before March, we're cruising.
Yeah. So
Actually, January is a good month because, like, there's nothing going on
Yeah.
theatrically generally anyway.
But I guess we should mention, we've been doing, this is the 20th episode. We've been doing a lot of our choices based on the poll on the website. And recently we've noticed that the poll may have been compromised in some way. So we don't know how reliable those results are anymore, but we're thinking we may just scrap the poll. And, if you guys out there have suggestions, feel free to email us or leave comments on the website. But we may just decide amongst ourselves from here on in for each episode. I guess, as always, we want to invite you guys to head over to movieclubpodcast.com. And if you've seen the movies and you've listened to the podcasts, let us know your thoughts on Visitor Q and Irreversible. And anything else before we wrap it up?
I think that's about it. I think that wraps it up.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you, James, for joining us. And thank you for Marina for returning. It's been a while.
It has. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me this time. It was fun.
Are you coming next time, James?
He's coming right now.
Classic.
As long as Matt's not there. If Matt's invited, I'm not coming. I'll play volleyball that night.
Good
No,
choice.
for sure, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I'd love to do another one. And I look forward to it.
Okay,
Great.
well,
Wonderful. Great.
be sure to visit all of our websites. We've got Film Junk, we've got Twitch, we've got the documentary blog, we've got Quiet Earth, we've got Where the Long Tail Ends, we've got Row 3. Am I missing any?
All right. The website's broken right now, though. It's that, but we're going to. Matt's been working to fix it. It says it's. What does it have? Like some kind of robots or something?
Yes, it has robots.
Well, just tell Matt to get his shit together over there.
Yeah, it's
my shit.
he had a what was it called, a Moorbot?
What?
You had a Moorbot, and you downloaded a program and it gave you a Moorbot.
No, that's not even close to what happened. What are you doing?
It's probably the best ending to a movie club podcast ever.
It's threatening to turn into the IT Club podcast.
All right, well, I guess we better end it here. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Visit movieclubpodcast.com, and we'll see you in about 2 months' time, roughly, I'm guessing. So, bye-bye for now.
大きくて大きくて姿が見えない海ゆらゆらと立ち上がりそして砕け散る波小さなあぶくがたくさんたくさん生まれて光に照らされてキラキラ輝くよ
Okay, anything else before we start? Are we good to go?
When will I start being able to see you?